Thank you. It is 29 minutes to 9. In her review of the Jimmy Savile abuses at the BBC, Dame Janet Smith said she was told of 17 occasions of abuse by Savile in connection with the programme Jim'll Fix It, of which 9 were with children under the age of 16. One man produced Jim'll Fix It for the whole of its 19-year run, Roger Ordish. Mr. Ordish gave evidence to Jane Janet's inquiry, and she described him as honest and decent. She was satisfied he had not been aware of any criminal conduct by Savile. I've been talking to Roger Ordish about working life alongside Jimmy Savile.
What I used to say about Jimmy Savile before I knew about all this ghastly business was that I knew him probably as well as anybody did, but that wasn't very well, because he was such a secretive man. He spent his whole life hiding things and rather enjoying hiding them, probably. But that's hindsight.
Did it seem odd to you, his behaviour at the time?
Well, I always found his behaviour rather odd, but you're not thinking about it. You're not saying, is Jimmy Savile a drug smuggler? Is Jimmy Savile a paedophile? You're just thinking, that's Jimmy Savile. You know, he was a difficult person to communicate with, and when this idea was first promoted by my boss, Bill Cotton, I went to see Bill and said, I think this is a wonderful idea, but I think it would be better if someone else were presenting the programme. That was nothing to do with Jimmy Savile's moral behaviour. It was my opinion of his ability to communicate with young people.
One of the things Dame Janet Smith says is that Mr. Ordish knew or would have recognised, if he had applied his mind to it, that there was a falsity in Jimmy Savile's position on Jim'll Fix It. Is that fair?
A falsity? I'm not quite sure what she meant by that.
But I suppose what Dame Janet was getting at is that he was being presented as something that he wasn't. He was being presented as an avuncular figure. And in retrospect, that was a mistake, and that was the kind of thing that was at least possible and indeed likely to lead to disaster.
Yes, I'm afraid you're probably right. I mean, he did openly say, I hate children, but...
Did he say that to you?
Yeah, but when he said it publicly, he'd say it to newspapers.
Did you ever like him at all?
Well, we got on well, you know. We would laugh and have pleasant conversations together, but I never felt close to him because he built a barrier around himself that made it impossible to approach him, really.
Is it going too far, though, to say that you felt that he was creepy, that he was a potential threat, not necessarily a paedophile threat, a rapist threat, but that he was not someone who you'd want vulnerable people to be around? Yes,
I think that's true. Creepy, but never crossed my mind that there was any kind of paedophilia going on.
There's a bit in Dame Janet's report where she says that it appears that a producer, which she thinks was you, shouted at Jimmy Savile because he'd locked his dressing room door when a girl was inside and asked if the girl was okay when she left. Is that something you remember?
I remember Dame Janet asking me that, and I honestly cannot remember the occasion.
Could it have happened, do you think?
It seemed unlikely to me, but it's possible, I suppose. I can't say it didn't happen.
You see, another thing she says is that among the people who are responsible for the safety and welfare of the Jim'll Fix It guests, there grew up an appreciation that Savile presented a possible risk to young people. She says there is evidence that you were a party to that concern. Is she going a bit further than you remember being the truth?
Well, I do remember saying that he should not be left alone with children, but that would apply to the presenter of any programme, because the rules as they stood then was that a young person must always be chaperoned. But it wasn't for fear that he was going to do something awful to the child, but I did think that his presence was unnerving for some children.
Really, you realised, you could see that some children found him unpleasant to be with?
Well, frightening, I think, yes. A person who communicates well with children speaks on their level. To me, his approach was to speak down to them, or speak very little to them, really.
There was a section of Dame Janet's report that talks about dubious fixes on Jim will fix it, and there's one in particular where a convicted child abuser is set up to pretend, at least, to fix a music box for a girl. I mean, it's strange on every level, really. There's no evidence, I don't think, that the abuser abused the girl concerned. Do you remember that incident?
I do remember that event, that fix it, as we called it, and what I didn't know was that it was rigged in any way. The fact that the man turned out to have been a convicted paedophile was obviously a complete coincidence, because I'm sure everyone would know that Jimmy Savile wouldn't say, "Hey, I hear you're a paedophile, well, I'm one too, would you like to come on my program?" It's not going to work like that. So I suppose statistically it's possible that a paedophile would be on the program without us knowing that's what he was.
But I mean, is it fair to say that it's evidence of a considerable laxness in the way that the program was run? Number one, that there were fixes you didn't know about, and number two, that there was so little care taken about who the children were put in contact with.
Well, I don't think it would be possible to vet any person that appeared on the program to see if they had a criminal record. And we certainly didn't do that if we should have.
Dame Janet asked you whether you ought to have known. Ought you?
I find the question, ought you to have known, rather a difficult one to answer, because what exactly does it mean? I ought to have known something, but I didn't, but I should have. The circumstances would have had to be different for me to have known. If someone had come to me and said a specific thing had happened, a complaint about Jimmy Savile's behaviour, I would immediately have done something about it and taken the BBC procedure, going up the line to my manager and him to his, and that's what would have happened if I had known, but I did not. And a way of demonstrating how much I didn't know and I was not turning a blind eye was that Jimmy Savile came to stay in our house one night, and we put him in the bedroom next door to my 14-year-old daughter. And I don't think that's the act of a man who's turning a blind eye.
And you did work, you said that you didn't particularly like him, but you did work quite closely with him for quite a long time. What impact has this had on you and on the way you think back on your career with him?
Well, just for my sort of personal comfort, it's been a terrible shock. I know it's of no significance in comparison with the terrible things that have happened to the victims, but in retirement, people say, "What did you do?" And they say, "Oh, I was a BBC television producer." "Wow, what programs did you produce?" And I would say, "Oh, Jim will fix it. I did that for 20 years. And you'd get a wonderful reaction of, "Oh, we enjoyed it, the children loved it, all the family used to sit and watch it." And now it's something I can't mention. I just have to be ashamed of it.
Roger Ordish, thanks very much for talking to us.